The bell above the door at Ironclad Firearms chimed at 9:17 a.m., and nobody looked up. The man who stepped inside moved the way old rivers move, slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of something carved over decades rather than chosen in a moment. He was thin in the way that men become thin when time has reduced both muscle and certainty. Shoulders still broad, but no longer filling the blue and white flannel shirt he wore, a pattern faded to the color of sky after rain. His khaki trousers had been pressed sometime earlier that week. His brown leather boots, worn at the right heel in the particular way of a man who has spent too many years standing on uneven ground, had been polished until the leather breathed rather than shone. His hair was white, cut close to the skull, in a style that had no name in any barbershop catalog, but was recognized immediately by anyone who had ever stood in a formation at 0600 hours. He carried a canvas bag in his right hand, olive drab. The stitching on the handle had been repaired at least twice. The interior of Ironclad Firearms occupied what had once been a hardware store in Harrow Creek, Montana, a long, low-ceilinged space that smelled of gun oil, old wood, and the particular brand of masculine confidence that accumulates in rooms where men come to feel capable. Glass display cases ran the length of the left wall, rifles and shotguns mounted on pegboard behind them. At the far end, a door marked range led to 6 shooting lanes. To the right, a window of reinforced glass looked into the manager's office, where a light burned behind closed blinds. 14 people occupied the space that morning, customers examining scopes, a pair of young men debating calibers near the ammunition shelves, a woman in her 60s sitting in one of the plastic chairs by the entrance, and behind the main counter, a man in his early 30s who wore his authority in the shop the way some men wear expensive watches, visibly, and with the expectation that everyone would notice. His name was Carter Webb, and he had been working the counter at Ironclad for 4 years, which in his private accounting made him something of an expert on the taxonomy of customers. He could sort them in under 30 seconds. The serious buyers, the browsers, the veterans who wanted to talk more than purchase, and the time wasters, the confused, who needed to be handled efficiently and redirected toward the door. The old man with the olive drab bag registered as the last category before he had taken 3 steps inside. Carter was already composing his expression, a particular blend of patience and polite superiority, when the man set his bag on the counter with a care that was almost ceremonial, unzipped it, and placed a pistol on the glass surface between them. The weapon was a Colt M1911 Series 70. The bluing had worn to a gray patina on the slide and frame, where tens of thousands of hands-on repetitions had touched it over what could only have been decades. The grips were original walnut, cracked along the left panel in a hairline fracture that had been stabilized rather than replaced. It was old. It was absolutely, unmistakably functional. "Need service," the man said. His voice carried the flat, unhurried quality of someone accustomed to saying exactly what was necessary and nothing more. "Recoil spring and extractor." Carter looked at the pistol. Then he looked at the man's hands, resting on the edge of the counter. The right hand showed a tremor. Not dramatic, not the tremor of illness, but the fine, continuous tremor of nerve damage, expressing itself across years of accumulated miles. The left hand was still. "Are you sure you can still—" Carter began, then softened it to, "This is an older model. We specialize mostly in current production firearms. Service on something like this takes time, and the parts cost adds up." The man across the counter said nothing. He simply waited, with the specific quality of waiting that belongs to people who have spent significant portions of their lives in positions where patience was not optional. It was the young man leaning against the scope display who filled the silence. Mason Pruitt was 26, lean in the athletic way of someone who trained regularly and was aware of it, wearing a tactical shirt with the sleeves rolled up to display forearms that had spent time at both the gym and the shooting range. He was the reigning champion of the Harrow Creek Shooting League's open division, a fact he had mentioned in conversation at Ironclad no fewer than 12 times in the past 3 months. He had what might be described as a talent for mockery that presented itself as humor. He picked up the M1911 from the counter without asking. "M1911, he said, turning it over in his hands with the careless authority of someone handling another person's property. "You buy this when Kennedy was still in office?" He held it up toward the overhead lights, squinting at the worn finish. This thing's older than my grandfather. Quiet laughter from the ammunition shelf. Carter allowed himself a small smile. The old man watched his pistol in Mason's hands. His expression did not change, but his eyes tracked the weapon with the specific, flat attention of a man cataloging the location of something important. Not worried, not angry, simply precise, the way a surgeon watches a scalpel that has been picked up by someone who does not know what they are holding. In the plastic chair near the entrance, the woman in her 60s, Hazel Morrow, who came into Ironclad every few weeks to pick up ammunition for the .38 revolver she kept in her bedside table since her husband had passed, looked at the scene over the top of her reading glasses and allowed her expression to register what she thought of it. "You need this back in working order, or you need a replacement?" Carter asked, his tone now carrying the brisk efficiency of someone who has already decided the answer doesn't really matter. "Working order," the man said. "We're looking at 85 for labor, parts on top of that. For a pistol this age, it might be more cost-effective to look at something new." Carter gestured toward the display case with the magnanimous sweep of someone offering a favor. 85 is fine, the man said. The speed of the agreement seemed to briefly displace Carter's composure. He had quoted twice the standard rate, expecting resistance that would allow him to begin the process of encouraging the old man toward the door. From a plastic chair in the far corner of the shop, the one nearest the window, the one that caught the morning light at the right angle for a man with aging eyes, Raymond Foss set down his coffee cup. He was 73, a Vietnam-era veteran who had been coming to Ironclad since Jasper Holt had opened it, and who came in now mostly for the coffee and the company of a room that smelled familiar. He looked at the old man at the counter. He set his cup down slowly. "Precisely. The way you set something down when your hands need to be free." At the far end of this counter, a young woman in her mid-20s was reassembling a disassembled Beretta that had come in for cleaning. Ivy Cross had been the shop's in-house armorer for 3 years, and she had the focused, quiet competence of someone who was good at her job and comfortable with the fact that most people in the room would not notice. She paused in her work. "Not obviously." She continued moving her hands, but her attention shifted. The old man at the counter had taken the M1911 back from Mason Pruitt without asking for it. He had not reached for it aggressively, had not snatched it. He had simply extended his left hand, and something in the quality of that extension, the angle, the certainty, had caused Mason to place the pistol in it before consciously deciding to do so. The old man checked the chamber, verified the magazine was empty, thumbed the safety through a quarter rotation, and set it back on the counter. All of it in 4 seconds. All of it without looking at the weapon. Ivy's hand slowed slightly over the Beretta. From near the door, a larger man in a canvas work jacket pushed himself to his feet from the bench where he'd been waiting for his truck's worth of ammunition to be pulled from the back. Blake Danner ran a construction crew out of Billings, came through Harrow Creek twice a month, and had the particular social confidence of a man who had never been in a room where his size and volume were not sufficient to establish his position. "What's he going to do with a working pistol anyway?" he said to the room, not bothering to lower his voice. "Shoot at the TV when the commercials come on?" The laughter was louder this time, less qualified. Floyd Keene, the store manager, stood behind the secondary counter near the register. He was 38, had worked for Jasper Holt for 6 years, and managed the day-to-day operations of Ironclad with the bureaucratic self-importance of someone whose authority extended precisely as far as this building and no further. He heard Blake's comment and did not intervene. In fact, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. The old man turned his head and looked at Blake Danner. The look was brief and entirely undramatic. The way a man looks at weather he has already calculated the implications of. Then he turned back to the counter. "I'll be here if you want to call when it's ready," he said to Carter. Before we go further, if you're watching this and already thinking something feels different about this old man, you're not wrong. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moment everything in this room changes. This channel exists for stories of warriors who never stopped being warriors, even without the uniform. Hit like right now if you believe real strength never needs to announce itself. Stay with us. Carter was reaching for the service intake form when Mason stepped closer, leaning an elbow on the glass case with the practiced ease of someone comfortable taking up space that belongs to others. "Old man, you want to actually use that thing, or just have it serviced to hang on the wall?" He nodded toward the range door. "Because we've got lanes in the back, you want to see if you can still hold it steady." It was not a question. It was the particular kind of offer that is actually a dare, constructed to provide an audience with a guaranteed performance, regardless of the outcome. Either the old man declines and provides the satisfaction of confirmed cowardice, or he accepts and provides the satisfaction of confirmed incompetence. The old man looked at Mason Pruitt for 7 seconds. Hazel Morrow counted, because she had the sudden conviction that the count mattered. "All right," the old man said. One word. The room processed it. In the back hallway, the door to the parts room opened 2 inches. Otis Wade looked through the gap. A man in his late 50s, heavy-set, with hands that had been working on firearms for 3 decades. He had heard the exchange from the back. He looked at the old man standing at the counter. His expression underwent a change that was not visible to anyone who was not specifically watching him. He eased the door closed, reached for his phone. The range at the back of Ironclad consisted of 6 lanes, each 12 feet wide, with target frames on mechanical trolleys that could be positioned at distances from 7 to 50 meters. The overhead lighting was good. Jasper had invested in proper illumination after a complaint from a customer who claimed poor lighting had affected his grouping, which was almost certainly false but had prompted the upgrade anyway. The air smelled of lead and burnt propellant, a smell that means different things to different people. Ivy Cross led the group through. Mason had brought 2 of his friends from the ammunition shelf, and Blake Danner had decided the entertainment value justified staying another 15 minutes. Carter followed at the edge of the doorway, leaving it open so the sound carried back to the shop floor, where Hazel Morrow had repositioned her chair and a half-dozen other customers had drifted toward the range window. The old man accepted the range safety briefing from Ivy with the polite attention of someone hearing it for the first time and recognizing everything in it. He stood at lane 3. Ivy handed him a Colt M1911 from the shop's range use inventory, different from his own, a newer variant, along with eye and ear protection. He put both on, adjusted the ear protection with his left hand in a single instinctive motion, tapping the seal with 2 fingers. Ivy's head turned slightly. That particular 2-finger tap was a muscle memory behavior she had only ever seen in people who had spent years making sure their hearing protection was sealed before things got loud in environments where they had no control over the timing. Mason set up at lane 2 with his Glock 17, loaded a magazine with practiced speed, and proceeded to put 5 rounds into a target at 15 meters. A tight grouping, genuinely good shooting, the product of regular competition training. He stepped back from the lane, pulled his ear protection to one side, and looked at the old man. "Your turn, old man." The old man looked at the target frame. He did not look at the controls to set the distance. Instead, he nodded to Ivy, who moved the trolley to 25 meters. Mason exchanged a look with his friends. 25 meters with an unfamiliar pistol, for a man whose hand trembled visibly when it rested at his side. The old man raised the pistol. His right hand showed the tremor. His left hand came up to support. Not in the conventional Weaver or Isosceles stance exactly, but in something older, something that looked like those stances the way a prototype looks like a finished product. He exhaled once. His body went still in the specific way that is not the stillness of someone trying to be still, but the stillness of someone who has turned off everything unnecessary. He fired 5 rounds, left-hand primary. The range went quiet. Ivy walked the target forward without being asked, the way you do when you already know you need to see it up close. The 5 holes were clustered in a space that could have been covered by a silver dollar, placed slightly left of center mass. At 25 meters, with an unfamiliar pistol, by a man whose hand had been visibly trembling 30 seconds ago. The tremor, Ivy realized, was in his right hand. He had shot left-handed. "Lucky," Mason said. He said it immediately, the way people say things they do not quite believe but need to say anyway. "Try it again, 35 meters. The old man's expression did not shift. He waited for Ivy to move the target. When the trolley stopped, he closed his eyes for 1 second, just one, barely a blink, and then opened them and fired. In the shop, through the range window, Hazel Morrow watched. Raymond Foss had moved from his corner chair to stand 3 feet behind her. He was watching the old man's stance, not the target. The grouping at 35 meters was 4 rounds, not 5. The 5th round had gone through the same hole as the 2nd, which only became apparent when Ivy examined the paper carefully and found that the perforation was slightly larger than the others, elongated in a way that paper makes when hit twice in almost the same place. Mason stared at the target. Blake Danner, who had been leaning against the wall with the settled amusement of a man watching television, straightened slightly. "What's your background?" Mason asked. His tone had changed. The performance aspect had dimmed, replaced by something more direct and less flattering to himself. The old man lowered the pistol, checked the chamber, put it on the bench. "Retired," he said. "From what?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to feel intentional. "Government." Mason recovered his posture. He unholstered the Sig Sauer P226 he kept on his hip, a competition-grade weapon he'd had tuned at a shop in Missoula, and placed it on the bench between them. "Try mine. Different platform. Let's see if it's the gun or you." The old man looked at the P226. He picked it up. What followed was not a demonstration. It was purely functional, the physical equivalent of reading a sentence in a language you know. He dropped the magazine, confirmed the chamber was empty, reseated the magazine, racked the slide to chamber around, adjusted his grip by approximately 2 millimeters to the left, and dry-fired once against the closed range wall. 4.3 seconds, start to finish. "You've shot one of those before," Ivy said. She had not intended to say it aloud. The old man glanced at her. "Several," he said. It was not a boast. It was the same flat declarative quality as everything else he had said, the informational tone of someone providing data rather than impressions. He put 40 meters on the target, shot 5 rounds left-handed with the P226 Sopas, a pistol he had never touched before this moment, and grouped them in a pattern that Mason Pruitt, who shot competitively twice a month, would not have been confident of producing with his own weapon on his best day. From his position by the range door, Raymond Foss turned and walked back toward the shop floor. He moved with purpose, and he took the long way around the display cases until he was standing near the front counter, where he could see both the range window and the shop entrance. In the manager's office, Jasper Holt had come to his window. He was 55, the owner of Ironclad Firearms, a man who had served 8 years in the Army before buying this building, and spending the next 23 years making it mean something. He watched through the glass as the old man handed the P226 back to Mason Pruitt. Something in Jasper's posture changed, a subtle shift, the kind that happens when the brain processes information before the body has finished deciding what to do with it. He turned back to his desk and opened the computer. What happened next in the range happened in the space of a few minutes, but carried the specific weight of something significant approaching. Mason, working to recover the terms of the interaction, pivoted to technical language, the refuge of the knowledgeable person who has just been exceeded. He asked about minute of angle adjustments, about holdover calculations at varying wind speeds, about trajectory compensation for altitude. The questions were genuine but also performative, designed for the audience rather than for education. The old man answered in the same flat, complete way he had answered every question since walking through the door. MOA at long range was a function of barrel quality and consistency, not just optics. Holdover at wind speed was estimated, not calculated, until you had actual data points from the environment. Trajectory compensation at altitude was relevant above a certain threshold, and mostly irrelevant at the ranges they were discussing. Correct, precise, no wasted words. Then Mason asked about windage at speed, adding, like if you've got a crosswind at, say, 11 o'clock, 15 knots. 11 o'clock, 15 knots. The old man stopped. Something in his face shifted, barely. He was not looking at Mason anymore. He was looking at a space 3 inches in front of the range wall. Kandahar. Elevation adds another variable at that altitude. What the books say and what the rounds actually do, different problem. He stopped, blinked. The holdover is different. Silence. Kandahar, Mason repeated. The old man looked at him. The flat expression had returned, but underneath it, just barely, was the awareness of someone who has said more than they intended. The principle applies generally, he said. Ivy Cross set her tools down very quietly on the bench behind her. The range door opened. Floyd Keene leaned in. "Sir," he addressed the old man with the crisp authority of a man who has just gotten off the phone with someone he believed was on his side. "When you have a moment, the deputy would like to speak with you out front." Deputy Aaron Briggs was 34, built like someone who had played college football and not quite made peace with the fact that he hadn't gone further with it. He carried his authority the way men carry things they are still breaking in, visibly, with conscious effort. He stood in the center of the shop floor with his thumbs hooked in his belt and let the uniform do its work while the old man came through the range door. ID and concealed carry permit, Aaron said. No preamble, no explanation of why, because the expectation that he needed to explain had not yet occurred to him. The old man reached into the inside pocket of his flannel shirt and produced a worn leather wallet. He opened it, removed his driver's license and a federal firearms form, and set them on the counter. What happened next was the kind of thing that, viewed in isolation, looks like an accident. Blake Danner had moved to stand near the counter, not blocking it exactly, just occupying the space, the way large men sometimes do without actively deciding to. When the old man's documents came out, Blake shifted his weight, his elbow caught the edge of the counter, and the papers slid. 4 documents fanned out across the floor. Blake bent down to retrieve them, and in the process of bending, his work boot came down on the corner of one of them, an act whose accidental quality was precisely calibrated. "Here you go," Blake said cheerfully, handing back 3 of the 4. The old man bent down and picked up the 4th himself. When he straightened, he had taken approximately 2 seconds to do something with his eyes during the process of bending and rising, a quick, quiet sweep of the room that cataloged, without appearing to catalog, where every person in the space was standing. Who was near the door? Who was near the counter? What the sight lines were? Hazel Morrow, who had been watching, felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She could not have said exactly why. "Address on here is Rural Route 7, Aaron said, examining the license. "I don't have that in our system." "Bogman Road," the old man said. "Bogman Road. The county updated the rural route designations 2 years ago. Post office is slow. Name is Ezra Cole." "Yes. I'm going to need to run this." Aaron clicked his radio. Mason Pruitt leaned against the rifle display, watching. The tone of the afternoon had shifted on him. He had come in to watch an old man embarrass himself on the range, and instead he was standing in a shop where the air felt different than it had an hour ago, in a way he could not identify, and therefore could not dismiss. He picked up the thread of the technical argument because it was familiar territory. "You said Kandahar," he said to the old man. "When did you serve?" "I didn't say I served. You referenced specific conditions at specific elevation. The principle applies," the old man said again, flat, final. Raymond Foss, who had positioned himself near the front window, turned his head. He looked at Ezra Cole with the direct attention of someone who has made a decision. He crossed the shop floor until he was standing within speaking distance. "I know you," Raymond said, low enough that it was not a performance, just a statement. "I recognize you." The old man turned and looked at Raymond. A long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was not hostile. It was the calculation of someone deciding how much truth is appropriate and to what end. "No," the old man said. "You don't." It was not a denial delivered with defensiveness. It was a denial delivered with something closer to a request. The kind of statement that one man makes to another when the meaning underneath is not here, not now, not like this. Raymond Foss heard all of it. He held the old man's gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded once and stepped back. Holly Dunbar, who sat in the far corner with a notebook open, a journalist for the Harrow Creek Courier who had come in to pick up a quote from Jasper for a piece on local businesses, had her pen moving before she consciously decided to take notes. Aaron's radio crackled. The response from dispatch was brief, and the expression on Aaron's face when he heard it was the expression of a man whose expectation has not been met. He clicked off. "No record on Ezra Cole at this address," he said. "No priors, no—" He stopped. "No tax records, no vehicle registration, nothing in the county system. Like you don't exist." "I exist," the old man said. "What do you do for income? You said retired." "Government." "Which branch of government?" A pause that lasted 3 seconds. "Department of Defense." Aaron Briggs stared at him. The answer was not evasive in its content, but it was complete in a way that suggested that was all that was going to be offered, and that further questions would continue to receive equally minimal responses. Floyd Keene appeared at Aaron's elbow. He spoke in a voice pitched just below the general conversation level, but in a room that had gotten progressively quieter, it carried. "I need him out of the store while we sort this out. Liability issue. I'm asking you to remove him from the premises." The second sentence was directed at Aaron. "On what grounds?" Hazel Morrow said from across the shop, loudly and without apology. Floyd looked at her. "This isn't your business, ma'am. You have a legal customer with valid ID and a clean record who shot perfectly legally on your range, and has not raised his voice once, and you want him removed because—" She paused, letting the pause serve as the rest of the sentence. "There's a concern about—" "About what? His age?" The room was quiet. Carter Webb found something to examine on the shelf behind him. We're at the halfway point, and Ezra has said fewer than 15 words, but the walls are closing in fast. Before we get to what's hidden under that sleeve, take 1 second to subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with someone who understands that quiet men carry the heaviest histories. The like button is right there. Every tap helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it. Don't go anywhere. The next 60 seconds changes everything. In the back, through the parts room door left open 2 inches, Otis Wade watched the shop floor. He had been watching since the old man had come back from the range. His hands rested flat on the workbench behind him, and he was not moving. And he had the expression of a man who is calculating whether to act or to trust that what needs to happen will happen without him. He had known for approximately 23 years the general shape of who Ezra Cole was. He did not know the specifics. Nobody outside of a very specific cleared population knew the specifics. But his brother had served alongside a man in the late 90s, whose name he was not permitted to use in general conversation. And the general shape of that man was the same as the general shape of the man standing at the counter. The stance, the quality of stillness, the way the eyes moved in a room. He stayed where he was. He trusted that if Ezra needed intervention, Ezra would have already created the conditions for it. Aaron Briggs was not a bad man. He was a man operating on insufficient information, with a nudge from Floyd Keene that had pointed him in a direction that felt official. He looked at Ezra Cole, old, thin, trembling hand, quiet mouth, and then at his paperwork, which said nothing, and nothing, in his experience, meant something that needed explaining. "I need you to remove your jacket," Aaron said. "Standard search procedure when there's an unresolved background question." "There is no outstanding legal basis for that request," the old man said. His tone remained exactly what it had been throughout. Flat, informational, unhurried. "My documents are in order. I have committed no offense. You are welcome to verify my ID with federal systems rather than county, which will resolve your background question." Aaron absorbed this. The man was correct. Aaron knew he was correct. But Floyd Keene was standing 2 feet to his left, and Mason Pruitt and Blake Danner were watching from across the shop floor, and the momentum of the afternoon had its own gravity. "Sir, federal systems," the old man said again. "The county database will not have me. That is intentional and documented." This landed in the room differently than anything else that had been said. Intentional and documented. Hazel Morrow looked at Raymond Foss. Raymond was looking at his coffee cup. Holly Dunbar's pen had stopped moving because she was processing. In the manager's office, through the glass, Jasper Holt had stopped typing. He was looking at his screen with the stillness of someone who has just seen something that requires his full attention. His mouth was a straight line. He reached for his keyboard slowly, the way you reach for something when your hands are not entirely steady. Blake Danner, who had been reading the room and concluding, incorrectly but confidently, that the momentum was still running in his direction, pushed himself off the wall. He was a man who had always understood power as physical, spatial, a function of presence and proximity. The old man had held his ground too long, too quietly, in a way that felt like a challenge to the specific physics of Blake's world. He crossed the floor, stopped beside Ezra Cole, not touching, just proximate, the way you stand to make a point about who is larger. "Look, old-timer," he said, and the genial contempt in his voice was the distillation of everything the afternoon had accumulated. "Just take off the jacket and let the man do his job. Nothing to be embarrassed about. We all get old." He reached out and took hold of Ezra Cole's right sleeve. What happened in the next half-second was not a response. It was not a decision. It was the firing of neural pathways so thoroughly established over so many years that they operated beneath the level of cognition. Pure motor memory, the body doing what 3 decades of training had made automatic and irrevocable. Ezra's weight dropped 2 inches. His left foot moved 4 inches to the outside. His right arm rotated at the elbow, breaking the grip with the mechanical certainty of a lever. His right hand came to rest at his hip, not on anything, not reaching for anything, simply positioned where it had been positioned, tossed out in close-quarter situations more times than could be counted. His left shoulder dropped and turned, presenting a narrower profile. The entire sequence took less time than it takes to blink. Blake Danner took one step back, not because he had been pushed, because something in the quality of what had just happened had communicated to him at an entirely pre-verbal level that he was not the most dangerous person in this conversation. The room did not react with noise. It reacted with the specific silence of people who have just witnessed something their minds have not yet finished classifying. Ivy Cross set down the tool in her hand. She set it down quietly and precisely, the way you set things down when your hands need to be free for something you do not yet know the shape of. Aaron Briggs stood absolutely still. Mason Pruitt, who had spent 3 years studying competitive shooting, who understood bodies and movement and control in the specific technical language of sport, looked at the old man's stance, the weight distribution, the hand position, the angle of the shoulders, and felt something turn over in his chest that was not quite fear, but was the sensation immediately adjacent to it. The position was not from any sporting discipline he had ever studied. It was from a manual he had never read. Ezra Cole adjusted his stance back to neutral, unhurried, as if he were simply shifting his weight to be more comfortable. He looked at Blake Danner with the same flat, registering attention he had used on everything else in the room all morning. "I'm not removing the jacket," he said. "I have not been charged with anything. I am not required to." In the manager's office, the light from Jasper Holt's computer screen changed as a new page loaded. He leaned forward. His face, visible through the office glass, went through several calculations in rapid succession. Recognition, confirmation, something that might have been described as reckoning. He reached for his desk phone. And Blake Danner, because he was a man who had never learned to hear the particular silence that precedes irreversible things, reached for Ezra Cole's sleeve a second time. Part 2. His fingers closed around the flannel at Ezra Cole's right forearm, a grip that was not incidental this time, not the careless brush of a man making a point about proximity. It was deliberate. The grip of someone who had decided that the way to end an argument was to physically resolve it, because in Blake Danner's experience, that resolution had always been available to him. He pulled. The flannel was old. The stitching at the shoulder seam had been repaired twice in the way that functional garments get repaired, but not to look new, but to keep working. The second repair had been done with thread that was close but not identical to the original, and that seam had been under tension since the moment Ezra had adjusted his stance 4 seconds ago. And when Blake's grip tightened and pulled with the full casual confidence of a man who did not expect resistance, the seam gave. Not the whole sleeve. Not dramatically. A clean separation along the shoulder, the right arm of the flannel shirt peeling back along the line of the old repair, exposing the forearm and the lower portion of the upper arm to the fluorescent light of ironclad firearms at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Blake Danner let go of the fabric. The room did not fill with sound. It emptied of it. On the inside of Ezra Cole's right forearm, running from 2 inches above the wrist to the lower edge of the bicep, was a tattoo that occupied approximately 6 square inches of skin. It was not large. It was not decorative. It was black ink on skin that had tanned and aged around it in ways that spoke to decades of sun and weather, and the lines were precise in the way that things produced by people who do not do things casually are precise. A stylized arrow, not a decorative arrow, not the broad flourish of the commercial tattoo parlor, but a technical rendering, the kind that might appear in a field manual, pointing upward, with 3 evenly spaced horizontal hash marks crossing the shaft. Below the arrow, in a font so small it required proximity to read, 7-SF-O-A-721, and above it, in letters slightly larger but still restrained, a single word in block capitals: unconventional. Carter Webb, behind the counter, looked at it. His mouth opened and didn't close. Mason Pruitt looked at it. Then at the target paper still in his hand from the range, with its impossible grouping. Something in the architecture of the last 45 minutes rearranged itself in his understanding, and the new arrangement was not comfortable. Blake Danner looked at the tattoo, then at his own hand, then at the torn fabric hanging from the shoulder of Ezra Cole's shirt. The color in his face underwent a change that had nothing to do with embarrassment. and everything to do with the arrival of information that his body was processing faster than his reasoning mind. 3 people in the room moved. Raymond Foss, who had been standing near the front window with his coffee cup at his side, took 2 steps forward and stopped. He stood with his hands at his sides and his chin slightly elevated, and his face had the quality of a man who has just confirmed something he had been carrying as suspicion for the past 30 minutes. Otis Wade, who had been watching through the 2-inch gap in the parts room door, pushed the door fully open and stepped out onto the shop floor. He was not rushing. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried quality of a man who knows exactly where he is going and has already decided that there is no version of events in which he does not arrive. He pulled the shop apron over his head, folded it once, and set it on the secondary counter. He stood, and Jasper Holt came out of his office. He had a single sheet of paper in his hand, printed, from the look of it, from the screen that had been loading for the past several minutes. He came down the 3 steps from the raised office level to the shop floor, and he crossed the room at a measured pace. And the people between him and the main counter moved without being asked, the way people move when someone is walking with genuine purpose toward something that concerns them. He stopped in front of Ezra Cole. He looked at the tattoo. He looked at the man's face. He looked at the paper in his hand, and then back at the face, and the matching of those 2 things, whatever was on the paper and what was in front of him, produced an expression that was not surprise, because surprise implies the information was entirely unexpected. It was the expression of someone whose suspicion has been confirmed at a scale they had not quite allowed themselves to anticipate. Jasper Holt had served 8 years in the United States Army, one of which had overlapped in time and geography with operations he was not then and would never be fully cleared to know the details of. He had been close enough to the edge of things to understand the shape of them. He understood what ODA stood for. He understood what the ISF designation meant in that particular sequence. He understood in the broad strokes available to a man who had served at the clearance level he had served at, what the word unconventional meant as a tattoo on the arm of a man who had carried a government ID that Floyd Keane's radio request had bounced off of like a ball bearing off of plate steel. He came to attention. His feet came together. His right hand rose in a salute that was not ceremonial. It was not the salute of a man performing a gesture. It was the salute of a man paying a debt he has just discovered he owes. "Master Sergeant," Jasper Holt said. His voice was level and quiet and entirely serious. The shop held its breath. Otis Wade, standing 6 feet to Jasper's left, came to attention as well. The movement was the movement of a man whose body remembered something that years of civilian life had not erased. His right hand rose. Raymond Foss, near the front window, did not salute. He was older, and his service had been different, and the gesture that he made was something older than military protocol. He lowered his chin to his chest in the slow, deliberate way of someone acknowledging a weight that they recognize because they have carried adjacent versions of it. 3 seconds passed in which the only sound in ironclad firearms was the ambient hum of the overhead lights and the very distant sound of a truck passing on the highway outside. Aaron Briggs read the paper that Jasper had set on the counter. He read it twice. He was a man accustomed to paperwork, to the dry administrative language of warrants and reports and procedure. And what was on this paper was administrative language, but it was administrative language that operated in a register he had not previously encountered in his professional life. He read the phrase clearance, SAP/ACCM, and knew enough to know he did not know what that meant, which itself told him something. He read the phrase Medal of Honor nomination, and then the phrase downgraded per executive order, and then the phrase do not detain, do not question, notify DOD immediately. And he read his own name because it was not his name, but it was his function. And in this document, his function was in the category of things that were not supposed to happen. He set the paper down. He looked at Ezra Cole. The old man had not moved. He had not reacted to the salute with embarrassment, or with pride, or with any of the performative modesty that people display when acknowledged publicly. He had simply stood and waited with the same flat patience he had maintained since walking through the door, and let what was happening happen around him the way a stone in a current lets water happen around it. "Deputy Briggs," Jasper said, not taking his eyes from Ezra, Do you have any further questions for this gentleman? Aaron's throat worked. He was processing the gap between where he had been standing 15 minutes ago, in the confident middle of a clear jurisdictional action, backed by the store manager, addressing an elderly nobody, and where he was standing now. The gap was the distance between one kind of man and another, and he was becoming aware that the crossing of it was going to require something from him that he was not certain he had prepared. No, Aaron said. His voice came out lower than he intended. He cleared his throat. No further questions. Floyd Keene stood behind Aaron with the expression of a man watching a structure he believed was load-bearing turn out to be decorative. Hazel Morrow, who had been holding her phone at her side since Blake had reached for the sleeve, confirmed for herself that the video she had been recording was still running, and then put the phone in her cardigan pocket with the lens facing out. Holly Dunbar had stopped pretending to take notes and was simply watching, because the event in front of her had exceeded the capacity of shorthand. In the range doorway, Connor Briggs, Aaron's son, 19 years old, who had driven his father to work that morning because the department's second cruiser was in service and had been waiting in the parking lot, but had drifted to the range entrance when the raised voices carried through the wall, stood looking at the man his father had been attempting to remove from the premises. He looked at his father. He looked at the paper on the counter. He looked at Jasper Holt's salute. His face did not perform any particular expression. It absorbed. Ezra Cole looked at Jasper. He looked at Otis. He looked at Raymond. Three men who understood, at varying distances and through varying levels of clearance, the shape of what they were looking at. Something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. At ease, Ezra said. The two words landed with the quiet authority of a man who has said them 10,000 times in rooms where they mattered. Jasper lowered his hand. Otis lowered his. Raymond raised his chin. Ezra looked at Aaron Briggs. What he did not do was what the room expected. He did not dress Aaron down. He did not leverage the revelation that had just occurred. He did not use the sudden and complete reversal of the room's power structure to diminish the man who had, 20 minutes ago, been using his badge to diminish him. He simply looked at him for a measured moment and said, "You're young. Learn from today." Aaron Briggs stood with those 4 words in the center of his chest. He would carry them for a considerable time afterward. He straightened. Then, with the slow deliberateness of a man performing an act that is costing him something, he came to attention, and he raised his hand in a salute that was imperfect in its technique and entirely genuine in its intention. Ezra acknowledged it with a brief nod. Nothing more was necessary. The room began, cautiously, to breathe again. Mason Pruitt had moved to stand at the range doorway, holding the paper target from the lane. The grouping at 35 meters, those 4 holes and 1 double perforation, was visible from where he stood. He looked at it. He looked at the tattoo still visible where the torn sleeve had exposed Ezra's arm. He opened his mouth. He closed it. The comment that had been the default setting of his interactions all morning was no longer available to him, because the vocabulary of condescension requires a stable platform of assumed superiority, and that platform had been removed. He set the target down on the range bench and walked to the far end of the shop and examined a rifle mount for approximately 4 minutes without seeing it. Carter Webb had retreated to the counter where he had spent the morning performing small authority. He stood behind it now with the uneasy energy of a man who has just understood that the terms of every transaction he conducted this morning were based on an assumption that no longer held. The $85 quote, twice the standard rate, sat in his memory with the specific discomfort of a thing that cannot be unsaid. Blake Danner stood in the center of the shop floor holding the torn sleeve of Ezra Cole's shirt, which had come away from the shoulder seam in his hand when he had pulled. He was looking at it. He was a man who had spent 38 years being the largest and the loudest and the most confident person in most rooms he entered, and those attributes had always been sufficient. He had no vocabulary for this moment. He looked at the fabric in his hand and then at Hazel Morrow and her phone, and he understood, at last, and with the specific quality of understanding that arrives too late, that he had reached for an old man's sleeve in a room with 14 witnesses and a camera, and what he had exposed was not what he intended to expose. Jasper turned to face the room. The full room, all 14 people, the ones who had laughed and the ones who had watched the laughing and the ones who had turned away and the one who had pushed back. "I have been running this store for 23 years, he said. His voice was not raised. It carried the way quiet carries when a room is paying attention. "In that time, I have served veterans and active duty personnel and their families, and I've built something that I believed stood for something. What happened here this morning," he paused. He was looking at Floyd Keene, "does not represent that thing." Floyd Keene's mouth opened. "We can discuss it in the office," Jasper said. "Now." The instruction was not a suggestion. Floyd Keene recognized the tone. It was the tone that ends things. And he walked toward the office stairs with the deflated motion of a man who has just discovered the limits of his authority. In the clearest possible terms, Jasper looked at Carter. "You and I will speak this afternoon." Carter nodded, once with the expression of someone swallowing something unpleasant. At the back of the shop, Otis Wade had already returned to the parts room. The sound of his bench vise came through the open door, a clean, purposeful sound, the sound of work resuming. He emerged 3 minutes later carrying a tray with a disassembled M1911 laid out on it in perfect sequence. Recoil spring replaced, extractor checked and serviced, every surface that needed attention attended to. He set the tray on the main counter in front of Ezra Cole. "Recoil spring was tired," Otis said. "Extractor had a hairline on the hook, replaced both. Function checked clean." He paused. "I started on it when you went to the range." Ezra looked at the tray. He looked at Otis. "You've been here the whole time," Ezra said. It was not a question. "I work here," Otis said. A pause. "My brother served with a man 20-some years ago. He didn't give me details. He gave me the shape of things." He picked up a shop towel and wiped his hands with the slow thoroughness of a man who has said what he needed to say. The spring needed changing, that's all. Ezra Cole looked at Otis Wade for a moment with the full, attentive quality that he had rationed carefully throughout the morning. Then he nodded once in the way that meant what needed to be said had been said between them, and what had not been said did not need to be. He began to reassemble his pistol from the tray. The movements were the movements of someone for whom the process was as natural as arranging silverware, each component returning to its position with the authority of long familiarity. Magazine seated, slide-racked, safety engaged, barrel checked through the ejection port, holstered at the belt in the worn leather holster that had been on his hip since he'd walked in. Ivy Cross, who had been watching from the armorer's bench, picked up the torn sleeve of his flannel shirt from the counter where Blake Danner had abandoned it. She walked to the back, came back with a safety pin. Without preamble, she pinned the torn sleeve closed at the shoulder, not invisibly, not perfectly, but functionally, in the way that things in working environments get made to function when form is secondary. Ezra looked at the repair. "Thank you," he said. Ivy Cross, who had spent 3 years in a room full of men who did not notice the quality of her work, said nothing. She simply went back to her bench and picked up the Beretta she had been reassembling when the morning began. The aftermath of significant events in small rooms rarely resolves cleanly. What happens is more granular than resolution. It is a series of smaller adjustments, private and public, that accumulate into something that eventually looks like change when viewed from a sufficient distance. Floyd Keene walked out of Jasper's office 18 minutes later carrying a box that had been populated from the desk drawers with the quick efficiency of a man who knows the conversation is already over. He passed through the shop floor without making eye contact with anyone, pushed through the front door, and that was the end of Floyd Keene's tenure at Ironclad Firearms. He was not asked to come back. He did not. The conversation between Carter Webb and Jasper Holt happened later that afternoon in the same office, and it lasted 11 minutes. Carter was not fired. Jasper was deliberate about the distinction between cruelty and consequence, but Carter left that conversation understanding that the $85 quote and everything it had represented had been seen and named and entered into an accounting that would have ongoing relevance. He spent the following week being genuinely, visibly better at his job, which is the particular reform available to people who are capable of recognizing what they have done. Mason Pruitt retrieved the target paper from the range bench before he left. He did not throw it away. He took it home and pinned it above his reloading bench, and when people asked him what it was, he told them a man had shot it left-handed at 35 meters with an unfamiliar platform on a Tuesday morning in October. And when they asked what the man's background was, Mason said he didn't know exactly, and meant it. and felt the not knowing as a more useful education than most of what he had learned in his competitive career. Blake Danner drove back to Billings that afternoon with the particular quiet of a man who has been handed an image of himself that he did not commission and cannot return. Hazel Morrow's attorney called him 4 days later. The video had accumulated several thousand views on the local community Facebook group by the time the call came, not because anyone had promoted it, but because people in small towns recognize the shape of stories, and this one had the shape of something significant. Blake did not contest the civil matter when it was filed. His attorney advised settlement, and Blake agreed, because the video existed, and what it showed was unambiguous. Mobbish Raymond Foss was still at his corner window when Ezra Cole prepared to leave. Most of the other customers had drifted back to their original purposes, the human capacity to normalize the extraordinary reasserting itself with the quiet efficiency of weather. Raymond watched Ezra button what could be buttoned of the repaired flannel, check the holstered pistol at his hip with one hand, and pick up the empty canvas bag. Raymond crossed the shop floor. He stopped at a distance of approximately 6 feet, the distance of honest conversation between men who are not trying to impose on each other. "There was a man," Raymond said, 1968, Hugh City. "He pulled 4 of us out of a position that had already been written off. I was one of the 4. He paused. "That man's name was not available. I asked for it for years afterward through channels that were available to me, and it was never available." Ezra Cole stood and listened. "I'm not saying you're him," Raymond said. "You'd have been a child in 68. "I would have," Ezra said. "The shape of things," Raymond said. "Some men carry a particular shape, the ones who went into rooms where the math didn't work out and came back out anyway. The math leaving something on them." He looked at the repaired sleeve, the pinned shoulder. "I don't need to know your name. I just wanted you to know I recognize the shape." The old man looked at Raymond Foss for a moment with something that was not quite an expression, but was the negative space around one. The shape of what a man looks like when he has been seen accurately by someone who had the right equipment to see him. "Thank you for your service," Ezra said. "Yours," Raymond said. They shook hands. The handshake lasted 2 seconds and contained 34 years on one side and 57 years on the other, and the particular knowledge shared between men who have been in positions where the outcome was not guaranteed. Ezra Cole walked toward the front door of Ironclad Firearms. He did not look at the display cases. He did not look at the people who were watching him. He walked the way he had walked in, slowly, deliberately, carrying his own weight with the patience of someone accustomed to longer distances. Aaron Briggs was standing near the door. His son Connor was beside him. Aaron looked at the floor, then at Ezra, then at the floor again. The salute he had offered earlier had cost him something, and he was still taking inventory of what. "I'm sorry," he said, "for how this morning went. I should have—" He stopped, started again. "I should have done this differently." "You should have," Ezra said. "You will." The certainty of the second sentence, not a reassurance, not a hope, but a declaration stated the way you state established facts, made Aaron Briggs stand slightly straighter without being conscious of it. Connor was looking at Ezra Cole with the transparent attention of a 19-year-old who has not yet learned to disguise what he is thinking. What he was thinking, plainly, was that he was looking at something he did not have a category for yet, but intended to have one for eventually. Ezra glanced at the boy. He took in the age, the posture, the particular quality of attention. He said nothing directly to him. He looked at Aaron. "Your son," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "Good posture," Ezra said. He pushed open the door and walked out into the Montana morning. Connor Briggs stood in the doorway and watched the old man cross the parking lot. Then he turned to his father. Then he went back inside and found Jasper Holt reorganizing the display case nearest the range door with the focused attention of a man who needs to be doing something with his hands. "Mr. Holt," Connor said. Jasper looked up. If someone wanted to enlist, where would they start? Jasper set down the rifle he had been repositioning. He looked at the boy. The age, the posture, the question asked in the doorway of a room that had just provided a particular kind of education. He pointed at the chair where Hazel Morrow had spent the morning. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make coffee." Ivy Cross waited until the shop had returned to something approaching its normal operational rhythm before she walked to the computer at the armorer's station and opened a search window. She typed ODA 721 Special Forces. The results that came back were what she had expected them to be, which was to say they were nothing. Not sparse, nothing. The designation did not appear in any publicly accessible document, any archived news article, any congressional record, any declassified operations summary. She tried variant searches. She tried historical SOF databases. She tried every combination of the numbers and letters that she could construct from what she had seen on the tattoo. Nothing. Not redacted, simply absent. The way something is absent when it has been removed, rather than when it was never there. She stared at the screen for a moment. Then she went back to work because there was a disassembled Beretta on her bench that still needed to be finished, and some questions were not answered by searching. The email arrived in Jasper Holt's business inbox at 10:14 a.m., approximately 27 minutes after Ezra Cole had walked through the door, which meant it had been sent before most of what had happened in the shop had happened. Jasper found it when he returned to his desk after the conversation with Connor Briggs. The sender address was a format he had seen once before, during a consultation with a federal licensing body, and it was not a format that appeared in commercial correspondence. The subject line was a reference number. The body of the email was 6 sentences. The relevant sentences read, "Mr. Cole is known to this office. He is to be extended full professional courtesy and assistance when identified at licensed firearms dealers. His background will not appear in standard county, state, or commercial databases. Any formal query regarding his status should be directed to the contact number below. Please ensure your staff is aware of this communication going forward. Thank you for your cooperation." Jasper sat back in his chair. He looked at the timestamp. He looked at the time on his wall clock. He calculated the gap between when Ezra had walked in and when this email had been sent. Someone had known Ezra Cole was walking into Ironclad Firearms before Jasper had run his background check, before the situation had escalated, before any of it. He reached for his phone. He dialed the contact number at the bottom of the email. It rang twice. "This is Holt," he said, "at Ironclad Firearms. There was a situation this morning. Mr. Cole is fine. I wanted you to know in case—" He listened. "Yes." A pause. "I understand." Another pause, longer. "He does?" The final pause was the longest. "Thank you. I'll do that." He hung up. He sat for a moment looking at the far wall of his office where a framed photo hung that he had carried from posting to posting during his 8 years of service. Nothing classified, nothing remarkable, just a group of men in a place he had been. The kind of photo that accumulates meaning over time rather than having it at the moment of taking. He picked up a yellow sticky note. He wrote a single sentence on it. He put the sticky note in his pocket because the information it contained was not for a desk. He walked downstairs and hung the sign on the front door that said "Closed for Inventory." And for the first time in 23 years of running Ironclad, he locked the front door before 4 o'clock. Then he stood in his own shop, which smelled of gun oil and old wood, and the particular accumulated history of the morning, and looked at the chair where Ezra Cole had not sat, and the counter where his documents had been dropped and stepped on, and the range door through which a grouping had been produced that he would tell people about for as long as he could tell stories. Above the register, he pulled a small printed card from the stack he kept for community announcements and turned it over, clean side up. He wrote 4 words on it in permanent marker, pressed it flat on the counter surface, and pinned it to the board above the register where it would remain for the next 11 years. Veterans served first. No exceptions. Hazel Morrow, in her car in the parking lot, reviewed the video she had taken. It was 3 minutes and 42 seconds long. It began with Blake reaching for the sleeve and ended with the salute and Ezra's 4 words to Aaron. The image quality was what it was, shot from a cardigan pocket, slightly angled, but the sound was clear, and the critical images were unambiguous. The torn sleeve, the tattoo, Jasper coming to attention. She uploaded it to the Harrow Creek Community Facebook group with a caption that was 6 words long. What happened at Ironclad this morning? She drove home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table, which was where she sat when she needed to think about things that required sitting. Her husband had served. He had come back different, and she had loved the different man as much as she had loved the man before, and he had been gone 9 years now, and sometimes something happened that made the world look the way it had looked when he was in it, a particular quality of seriousness, the weight of something real pressing through the surface of the ordinary. She picked up her tea and sat with the morning. By 3 p.m., the video had 4,000 views. By 6 p.m., it had 19,000. By the following morning, it had cleared 100,000, and requests from local and regional news outlets had filled the community group's admin inbox to capacity. Holly Dunbar's piece in the Harrow Creek Courier, published online the same afternoon, titled simply "An Ordinary Tuesday at Ironclad Firearms," was careful in its language in the specific way that good journalism is careful. It described what had happened without speculating on what it meant. It named the businesses involved and the general sequence of events. It quoted Hazel Morrow and Raymond Foss and Ivy Cross, and it mentioned the existence of the federal documentation without reproducing its contents or speculating on the clearance designations it referenced. It did not name the old man, because Holly had been a working journalist long enough to understand the difference between the story she was allowed to tell and the story she was not. And she told the one she was allowed to tell with sufficient precision that the one she was not allowed to tell was visible between the lines for anyone who knew how to read them. The piece was picked up by 3 regional outlets within 24 hours and by a national veteran-focused publication within 48. Floyd Keene, reading the comments on the video from his apartment in Billings, where he had relocated within a week of his termination, found the experience instructive in ways that were not comfortable. He did not comment. He did not share. He closed the phone and sat for a long time with the specific interior weather of a man who has been accurately represented in a public record and cannot argue with the accuracy. 3 days after the morning at Ironclad, Ivy Cross drove to the county library on her lunch break and requested access to their historical military records database, the one available to researchers and journalists that access declassified archives at a broader level than public internet searches. She spent 40 minutes. She found the same nothing she had found at her workstation, but she found it through a more comprehensive system, which meant the nothing was more informative. ODA 721 did not appear in any declassified record because it had not been declassified. Units that had not been declassified appeared in no record. This was expected for active operations and for operations within a recent classification window. The classification window for ODA 721, based on what Ivy could infer from the absence of adjacent records in specific archives, extended back at least to the early 1980s. She sat with this information, 40-some years of classification. Operations conducted over a period during which the man she had watched shoot a pistol at 35 meters with his non-dominant hand would have been in his prime. She thought about the word unconventional. She thought about the hash marks on the arrow. She thought about Kandahar, which had come out of his mouth with the automatic specificity of a place that existed in his muscle memory rather than his studied knowledge. She drove back to Ironclad and put the Beretta she had finished reassembling into its owner's box for pickup and started on a Springfield that had come in for a trigger job. She did not tell anyone what she had found, not because she was keeping a secret, but because some information completes itself simply by being understood, and the understanding does not require an audience. Otis Wade locked up the parts room at 5:30 p.m. on the day of the morning at Ironclad. He drove to his brother's house, 20 minutes outside of town, up a gravel road that the county maintained with the minimum attention consistent with not being sued, and sat at the kitchen table while his brother made dinner. His brother was 61, had been out of uniform for 22 years, and carried his service in the particular way of men who had done things that could not be spoken of in the specific rooms where such things are spoken of, which is to say he carried it silently, thoroughly, and without apparent effort. Otis waited until dinner was on the table. "The man came in today," he said. His brother set down his fork. He looked at Otis across the table. "The one you told me the shape of," Otis said. His brother looked at the table, then at the window, then at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a man reaching for something he has kept stored in a high, inaccessible place. "He doing all right?" "He was doing all right," Otis said. "Good." His brother picked up his fork. "That's good." They ate dinner. They talked about other things afterward, and they did not come back to it, because everything that needed to be said about it had been said, and the rest was not available to them, and they both understood that this was appropriate. The mountains east of Harrow Creek hold their cold in the morning even in October when the afternoon is still warm, and the road that runs from the edge of town to the high country passes through a corridor of lodgepole pine before opening onto the first of several meadows that look, at that hour, exactly the way a person might imagine the interior of a country that has not yet been fully decided. Ezra Cole pulled to the side of that road at 10:23 a.m. and stopped the engine. He sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel. The truck he drove was a 1989 Ford, the kind of vehicle maintained rather than replaced, which meant it had outlasted several of its original components and been made to continue by the kind of care that does not announce itself. He reached into the canvas bag on the passenger seat and removed the M1911. He performed the function check that was not necessary. The weapon was clean, serviced, fully operational, and performed it anyway, because the habit of verification belongs to people who have learned the cost of assumption. He holstered it. He sat. The phone on the center console was a basic model, the kind that made calls and sent texts, and did not require a data plan or a cloud account, or any of the distributed record-keeping that phones had accumulated as standard features. It vibrated against the console surface. He looked at the screen. The number was not a stored contact. It was a format he recognized, the way you recognize things that have appeared consistently across decades of a particular kind of work. He let it ring once more. Then he picked it up. He listened. He said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, when? He listened again. How many people know the location? He listened. I'll need 48 hours. A pause. Tell them I'm already moving. He ended the call. He set the phone on the console. He looked out through the windshield at the lodgepole pines and the first meadow and the cold morning light doing what it does to Montana at this hour, which is to make everything look as though it has been there since before the concept of before. He had come to Harrow Creek to have his pistol serviced. That part was done. It had always been the main thing. The rest of the morning, the laughing, the range, the torn sleeve, the paper that Jasper had printed and carried down from his office, none of it had been part of any plan. It had simply been what happens when a man who has spent 34 years working in the spaces between the visible moves through a room where people have never considered that such spaces exist. He started the truck. In the rearview mirror, visible for approximately 3 seconds before the curve of the road removed it from his sightline, a black vehicle was parked on the gravel shoulder 300 meters back. It had been there when he pulled over. It had been there. He knew, because the knowing of such things had been built into him at a level that was no longer distinguishable from instinct since before he had pulled over, possibly since before he had left town. The headlights on the black vehicle came on, not to illuminate. The morning light was sufficient, but as a signal, the particular signal that says, "We see you, we know, we're here," not threatening, not pursuing, simply present, the way certain things in this kind of work are present, without announcement, without demand, simply as a fact in the landscape. He watched the lights in the mirror. Then the vehicle eased backward, off the gravel, into the tree line, and was not there anymore. Ezra Cole drove forward. He did not look in the mirror again, not because the vehicle was no longer relevant, but because the information it had communicated was complete. And in this kind of work, you do not revisit completed communications. You act on what was said and leave the saying behind. The road opened onto the first meadow. Cold light, undisturbed grass, the particular quality of Montana mornings that has nothing to do with the people in them and everything to do with the accumulated geological patience of the ground beneath. He reached into the chest pocket of his flannel shirt, the one with the pinned shoulder, functional and imperfect, repaired by someone who had understood that functionality was what mattered, and removed a small object. He had carried it for 29 years. It was a challenge coin, the kind that does not carry any unit designation or organizational mark that would appear on any public record, because the unit it represented and the organization that issued it did not appear on any public record. On one face was the arrow. On the other face, in letters so small they required knowledge of their existence to find, unconventional means, unconventional ends. He looked at it for a moment. He put it back in his pocket. He drove. Chochao. The mural appeared on the side of the ironclad firearms building 9 days later. Jasper had not commissioned it. He arrived one morning to find it already finished. Someone had worked through the night, and there was no signature, and no artist came forward to claim it. It was not large, perhaps 4 feet by 6 feet, painted in colors that did not announce themselves, but were visible once you knew to look. It depicted a single arrow pointing upward, with 3 hash marks crossing the shaft, in the particular style of a man who had chosen to say something without saying it. The town did not know what it meant. Several veterans in Harrow Creek, when they saw it, did not comment publicly. They understood the protocol of not commenting. The mural remained on the wall of Ironclad Firearms for 11 years, through 2 repaints of the rest of the building's exterior, because Jasper instructed every painter who came to leave it. When people asked him why, he said it was a reminder. When they asked a reminder of what he said, of the cost of looking at something, and being certain you understand what you are seeing, he meant of an old man with a trembling hand and a worn flannel shirt, and a pistol that he had carried for so many years. The metal remembered his grip. He meant of the particular kind of American who does not announce himself, who comes into a room and does his business and leaves, whose service is so thoroughly classified that it is not a record, but an absence, who has earned more than any room has thus far offered him, and who does not require the offering. He meant of the 11 people who had laughed before they understood, and the one who had pushed back before she was asked to, and the young deputy who had raised his hand in an imperfect salute and heard 4 words that he would carry into every room of every kind he entered for the rest of his career. He meant of the shape of things that real service leaves on people, which is not the shape you expect when you look at a thin old man with a trembling hand and an olive drab bag and a flannel shirt that needs pinning. Ivy Cross, who drove past the mural every morning on her way to work, looked at it every morning in the same way. A brief, direct look, the way you look at something that says something true in a language you did not expect to encounter on the side of a building in a town this small. She had never fully answered the question of what ODA 721 was. She had arrived at the understanding that the question was not answerable by the methods available to her, and that this was the appropriate condition for some questions, and that living with the appropriate condition of a question without resolving it into false certainty was itself a form of accuracy. Raymond Foss died the following spring, not of anything dramatic, simply of the accumulation of time that takes everyone eventually. His obituary in the Harrow Creek Courier noted his Vietnam service and his regular presence at Ironclad Firearms, which had been his version of a community center for the last decade of his life. Holly Dunbar wrote the obituary. She wrote it well, the way she wrote everything, accurately, with attention to what mattered, without excessive decoration. At the end, she wrote a single sentence that had not been requested by the family and that she included because she believed it was true, and true things belonged in obituaries. He spent his last years in a room full of people he had reason to respect, and he died knowing the difference between the men who announced themselves and the men who simply The family thanked her for it at the service. Aaron Briggs made sergeant within 14 months. The change in the quality of his work, noted by his supervisor, noted by the people he served, was not attributable to any single event in the official record. But Connor Briggs, who enlisted 6 weeks after the morning at Ironclad, told the story at his first unit's informal gathering, in the way young soldiers tell the stories that shape their decision to be in the rooms they are in. He told it the way it happened. He did not embellish. He had learned from watching his father and a man named Ezra Cole that the events that matter do not require embellishment. Tut. Somewhere in the 48 hours after the phone call on the gravel shoulder of the road east of Harrow Creek, Ezra Cole drove. The road he took was not in any navigation system that operates on civilian infrastructure. The destination he drove toward was not on any map maintained by any agency whose records are available through standard channels. He drove the way he had walked into Ironclad Firearms, slowly, deliberately, carrying the weight of something carved over decades, with the patience of a man who has spent significant portions of his life in positions where patience was not optional, and haste was its own kind of risk. He had a pistol that had been serviced by a man who understood the weight of what he was doing without being told. He had a challenge coin that had been in his pocket for 29 years. He had a flannel shirt with a safety pin shoulder, which was functional, and functionality was what mattered. He had 48 hours. He was already moving. Real warriors, in Ezra Cole's experience, do not advertise. They do not require that rooms acknowledge them. They do not need the salute before they can operate. They require only that their equipment functions, that their information is accurate, and that what they have been asked to do can be done by the means available to them. He had been asked. The means were available. The rest was the shape of things. If this story hit you the way we believe it did, subscribe, like, and share it with someone who deserves to see it. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Ezra's place? Every comment keeps stories like this alive. Real warriors deserve to be remembered long after the uniform comes off. We'll see you in the next one. Don't miss it. The Open Road. The black vehicle reappeared on the third day. Ezra Cole had been driving southeast for 41 hours when he saw it the first time in his peripheral vision, not in the rearview mirror, where a surveillance vehicle would expect to be watched for, but in the driver's side window reflection as he pulled out of a gas station outside of Billings, a shape in the lot across the street. Dark, still, parked with the particular precision of something that has chosen its position rather than simply occupied the nearest available space. He paid for his fuel in cash. He drove east on the interstate at exactly the speed limit, which is the speed of a man who has nothing to hide, and also the speed of a man who understands that drawing attention in either direction costs the same thing. The vehicle did not follow him onto the highway. He did not expect it to. Vehicles like that did not follow. They were already ahead. He had been given a location in the call on the gravel road outside Harrow Creek. Not an address, coordinates, spoken once in a format that assumed the listener would retain them without writing them down, because writing them down was not the protocol for coordinates of this type. He had retained them. He drove toward them with the specific quality of attention that belongs to men who navigate by internalized data rather than by instruments. Not because instruments are unreliable, but because instruments can be accessed by people other than the man holding them. The coordinates resolved to a place in eastern Montana that the map designated as agricultural land, which it was, technically, in the sense that the land had been farmed at some point in its history, and the designation had not been updated to reflect subsequent arrangements. The actual condition of the land, fenced, managed, equipped with infrastructure that did not appear on any satellite image updated within the past 4 years, was another matter. He pulled off the county road at a gate that was closed, but not locked. He got out of the truck. He opened the gate. He drove through, got out again, and closed it behind him. Old habit. You close gates. You leave the landscape the way you found it. The track inside the fence ran for approximately 2 miles before it arrived at a cluster of structures that had been designed to read, from any aerial perspective, as a working ranch. A main building, 2 outbuildings, a water tower, a corral that contained 4 actual horses, because actual horses were the most effective way to make a working ranch look like a working ranch. Someone had understood the principles. A man was leaning against the main building's exterior wall when Ezra pulled up. He was perhaps 40, lean in the way of men who maintain themselves not for aesthetics, but for operational requirement, wearing ranch clothes with the slightly imperfect ease of someone who learned them rather than grew up in them. He was not someone Ezra had met before. This was not unusual. In this kind of work, you frequently did not meet people before you worked alongside them. You understood the work, and you understood the protocols, and those 2 things substituted for the social infrastructure that other people required. "Mr. Cole," the man said, not a greeting, a confirmation. "Yes," Ezra said. "They're inside." The man opened the door. "Pisita." There were 4 people in the main room. 3 of them Ezra did not know. The 4th was a woman in her mid-50s whose name he had not used in 11 years, but whose face he recognized with the specific accuracy of someone who has worked in close quarters with another person, in conditions where accurate recognition was a survival requirement. She looked, if anything, more composed than she had looked 11 years ago. Operational stress, in Ezra's experience, either wore people away or consolidated them, and she had always been the consolidating type. "Ezra," she said. "Doris," he said. She had been, 11 years ago, a case officer with a designation that he was not going to say aloud in any room he could not personally sweep for electronic presence. She had been, before that, something else. which was classified at a level that he held in common with her and perhaps 14 other living people. She looked at him now with the direct attention of someone conducting an assessment and finding it satisfactory. "You look old," she said. "I am old," he said. "You shot a competition grouping at 35 meters left-handed with an unfamiliar platform 3 days ago," she said. "I have the video." Ezra was quiet for a moment. "The video," he said. "The community Facebook group," Doris said. "Harrow Creek, Montana, 83,000 views as of this morning." She paused. "The relevant portion, approximately 9 seconds of footage, has been reviewed by people above both our pay grades." "I don't have a pay grade anymore." "That's currently under discussion." She indicated the chairs. "Sit down. We have about 90 minutes before we need to move." He sat. One of the 3 people he did not know set a folder on the table in front of him and stepped back. He did not reach for the folder immediately. He looked at Doris. "Tell me the shape of it first," he said. She told him. The shape of it was this. 14 months earlier, a communications intercept had identified a pattern of movement and resource transfer consistent with the preparation of an operation in a geographic area that had been considered stabilized. The pattern had been flagged, escalated, analyzed, and assigned to a working group that had produced 3 assessments in 4 months, each of which had been more urgent than the last. The working group had then identified a specific operational requirement, a single-point capability gap in the planned response, that could not be filled by any currently active personnel at the required clearance level with the required experiential background. The capability gap was precise. It was not physical, not entirely. It was the specific kind of gap that opens up when you need someone who has operated in a particular theater at a particular period, who has institutional memory that is not in any database because the operations it pertains to were never entered into any database, who can read a situation from inside rather than from the analytical remove of someone who learned about it from records. There were, the working group had determined, fewer than 6 people alive who met the full specification. Doris had been brought in to assess availability. She had made 3 calls. 2 of the people were not physically capable of field operations. 1 was not contactable through any channel that could be used without creating a record that would itself become a security problem. 1 had died in 2019 in circumstances that were on record as natural, and were, in fact, natural, which occasionally happened even in this kind of work. That left 2. "The other one," Ezra said. "Not available," Doris said. Her tone closed the subject without elaboration. He understood the shape of "not available." He had heard it used to describe various conditions across various decades, and he did not require the specifics to understand the category. "So it's me," he said. "It's you," she said, "if you're willing." He looked at the folder on the table. He had not touched it. He knew that the moment he touched it, the decision would be in a different condition than it was while he had not touched it. Not irrevocable, but shifted in its weight. "How long?" he said. 90 days minimum, could extend to 120. Active operations, advisory and assessment. There will be moments that require more than that. We're not going to pretend otherwise. And the capability gap specifically, Doris told him. He listened. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Outside the window of the main building, the 4 horses in the corral moved with the unhurried patience of animals who have learned that the urgency of the people around them is generally not their concern. He watched them for a moment. 34 years, he said. Not to her. Just a statement placed in the room, examined briefly, set aside. "I know," she said. "I came to Montana to have my pistol serviced," he said. "I know that too." A pause. "Otis Wade does good work." He looked at her. The information that she knew about Otis, about Ironclad, about the specifics of the morning in Harrow Creek, that information told him something about the operational infrastructure surrounding this request that the contents of the folder, when he read it, would confirm. This was not an improvised ask. This had been in preparation for longer than the 48 hours since the phone call on the gravel road. "The black vehicle," he said. "Outside Harrow Creek." "Ours," she said. "Not surveillance. Availability confirmation. We needed to know you were mobile and operational before committing resources to this meeting. You watched me at Ironclad. We watched the Facebook video at Ironclad," she said, "along with 83,000 other people. It was publicly available information." A beat. "You should know that the 9 seconds of footage showing your shooting have been reviewed by 3 people in positions of significant authority, and the consensus assessment was the same, which was that you remain what you were, Doris said, which is the only thing that matters for the purpose of this conversation. He reached out and opened the folder. He read for 11 minutes. He did not take notes because notes on documents of this classification level were not protocol, and also because he did not need to. The operational landscape resolved in his understanding as he read. The geographic specifics, the personnel involved at the current active level, the specific nature of the capability gap and why it required someone who carried its solution in memory rather than in any accessible record. He closed the folder. He pushed it back across the table. "There's a component you haven't told me," he said. Doris looked at him. "The intercept," he said. 14 months ago, the pattern of movement and resource transfer." He paused. "I recognize the methodology. It's not a new actor." The room was quiet. "No," Doris said. "It's not. Who else knows that?" "In this room," she said. "Everyone. Outside this room. 3 people above us who authorized this meeting, and no one else." "And the working group?" The working group identified the pattern. They did not identify the methodology's origin. That identification was made afterward, separately, by someone with the relevant historical context. She held his gaze. "Which is why you're the specific requirement, and not a general one." He understood. The shape of the thing was complete now. He had not needed the folder to tell him this part because the folder did not contain this part. It contained the operational parameters, but the operational meaning was in the 11 years of history that he carried and Doris carried, and approximately 14 other living people carried, and that history was not in any document. "I'll need equipment specifications sent to a clean channel," he said, already prepared. "I'll need 72 hours before any briefing with active personnel." "Understood. And I'll need—" He stopped. He looked at the window again. The horses, the cold Montana light doing what it does. "I'll need someone to call Jasper Holt." Doris tilted her head slightly. "Tell him the pistol is performing well," Ezra said. "That's all. Just that." Doris nodded once. "I'll make sure of it." He drove out of the ranch property at 1400 hours, closing the gate behind him with the same care he had used opening it. The black vehicle was not visible. This did not mean it was absent. He understood the distinction. The road back to the highway passed a section of fence line where a hawk had settled on a post. A red-tailed hawk, sitting with the dense, self-contained composure of a creature that has made its peace with heights. It watched the truck pass without adjusting its position. Ezra watched it in return for the 3 seconds during which they occupied the same sight line, and then the road curved, and it was behind him. 71 years old, a hand that trembled from a nerve injury sustained in a country he was not supposed to have been in a year that the official record did not reflect his presence in. A flannel shirt with a safety-pin shoulder, a pistol with a new recoil spring and a replaced extractor, serviced by a man whose brother had served with a man whose name was not available. He had been retired. The retirement had been genuine. Not a cover, not a maintained posture, but the actual condition of a man who had finished, who had done what he had been able to do for as long as he had been able to do it, and who had arrived at the far shore of that and found it quieter than expected, and had learned to inhabit the quiet the way you inhabit any position, with attention, with patience, with the understanding that conditions change. Conditions had changed. He was not, at this moment, performing an identity that he had set aside. He was not returning to something he had been and stopped being. He was simply the same man he had always been, the one who had walked into Ironclad Firearms at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October and into every other room before it, and who would walk into whatever room was next with the same flat patience and the same capacity for waiting and the same understanding that the work is the work, and that the work continues until it does not. Somewhere behind him, 300 meters or 3,000, it did not matter. Something moved in the tree line. He did not check. He drove. 6 questions remained in Harrow Creek after the morning at Ironclad, and none of them had answers that were going to be filed in any publicly accessible record. What was ODA 721? EA 7. What operation had required its creation? And how many people had known it existed? And how many of those people were still alive and in positions to know? Who had sent the email to Jasper Holt's business inbox 27 minutes after Ezra Cole walked through the door? and how they had known to send it before the situation escalated. What the phone call on the gravel road had contained in its full specifics, and where Ezra Cole had driven in the 48 hours following it. What the black vehicle in the tree line had been waiting to confirm, and who had authorized it to wait there, and for how long it had been positioned before Ezra Cole pulled off the road. What the other name on Doris's short list had been, and what not available meant in that context, and whether not available was a permanent or a temporary condition. And the oldest question, the one that predated all the others, what Ezra Cole had done, in whatever theater, in whatever year, that had produced a Medal of Honor nomination that was downgraded by executive order and buried under a classification so deep that the description of the actions was itself considered a security risk. The town of Harrow Creek did not know the answers. The mural on the side of Ironclad Firearms did not know the answers. Ivy Cross, who had searched the databases available to her, had confirmed that the answers were not in those databases. Raymond Foss had known the shape of things, and Raymond Foss was in the ground now, and what he had known about shapes had gone with him. The 4 horses in the ranch corral moved in the cold afternoon light, with the unhurried patience of animals, in whom urgency had never taken root. The hawk on the fence post had already moved to the next post by the time anything else came down the road. The truck drove east, and the road did what Montana roads do, opened up ahead and closed behind, mile by mile, the way all roads do when traveled by men who do not look in the mirror twice. Somewhere ahead, a room was waiting. Ezra Cole drove toward it at exactly the speed limit, which is the speed of a man who has nothing to hide, and also the speed of a man who has learned that arriving precisely when you intend to arrive is a habit worth keeping. The flannel shirt with the pinned shoulder was functional. Functionality was what mattered. The rest was the shape of things, and the shape, as always, would declare itself in time, in the rooms where such declarations are made, witnessed only by the people who are cleared to witness them, and carried afterward in the specific silence of people who understand that some stories do not conclude. They simply continue in the spaces between the visible, where the real work has always been done.